What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Pennsylvania Avenue, where we talk about news, politics, and history of the day. Literally, we go through a week of history. Yeah, we do. Which we'll be doing after this intro. I'm Rich Radio.
I am Jacob Boyd.
And we are just two average guys talking about politics. So come and join us and comment down below on how bad we are at this, please. But yeah, yes, that's what we do. But before we go, we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about, which is the history of the week, which is from July 1st to July 7th. Very historical week. Also, we are going to be talking about one of the Supreme Court justice cases.
The Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, Supreme Court decision.
Specifically about the unions. Yeah, union dues.
And then we are going to be talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah. Don't worry, it took me a while to get that one down.
I was thinking, I was like, wait, she has a middle name in there.
It's hyphenated.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we're just that would be our discussion topic. But before we do that, go ahead and like the video. Go ahead and subscribe to the College Avenue channel. And go ahead and share this with your friends that like politics and like discussing. We invite anyone and everyone, regardless of their political views, on current day politics, history, and the news. Not that we want arguments or anything like that, but we want to be able to learn both sides, and maybe you can learn something from us as well. But yeah, let us move on for the history of the week, which we have on our phones and on our screen. So July 1st, 1798. Napoleon captures the city of Alexandria, which is Egypt, right?
Yeah.
Interesting part of that, like how he ended up there. How he ended up in his position from when he was in Corsica. He because he had like a kind of like a court hearing for like almost a court martial, and when he showed up, there was no one that wanted to be an officer, and he's like, "I'll do it." And then they're like, "Oh, forget your case," and then became. Moved up in the ranks right after that.
Yeah.
Because of his record at his military academy. It was it's interesting how he was it's like how you were talking about Roberto Martinez, like a successful failure, but he was very successful, but it was just weird how he ended up. Charles Darwin presents his theory on the evolution of I can't read this right now. Jesus Christ.
He presents his theory of evolution to the Linnean Society.
I don't know why I always hesitate on words that I cannot pronounce for some reason. Sorry. I'm stupid. But yeah, Charles Darwin. You don't know who Charles Darwin is? Evolution. Look it up. Right? That's Charles Darwin?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Master and Commander. Right? What? With Kurt Russell?
Oh.
No, Russell Crowe. And Jude Law, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's historically accurate. But
probably.
Yeah. But they go to
the origin of
Galapagos Islands. 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg begins. Stonewall Douglas, right? That's his name. Several other things. I haven't read up on that in a while, but interesting. Canada becomes an independent from the British Empire, which was convenient. All they did was send the paper over, and they're like, "Oh,
no revolution required."
Exactly. And Canadians brag about that. Canadians brag about it all the time.
Nah.
The bloodiest battle of the Spanish-American War, the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. I just listened to a podcast on how that war started. Pretty interesting on Hertz and Pulitzer, and how influential they were back in the day, and how influential. I think the press back at that time was definitely more influential than it is.
Remember the main.
Exactly.
Another thing in this too, real quick, the Battle of San Juan Hill is also Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders were involved in that.
Exactly. That got him. He was one of those military. Well, that helped him out. I think there's other things that helped him out, but his military record definitely helped him out.
Sure.
Yeah. Princess Diana was born in 1961. Oh, that was 1898, by the way, for the date.
Spanish Civil War.
Yes. 1963, the U.S. Postmasters introduced zip codes.
Both of us had no idea that zip codes weren't a thing until 1963.
That's the year my mom was born.
Okay.
And my dad was born the year, so that's insane. Now it's only 50-something years old.
Yeah. And I'm curious now. I should have looked it up. I'm curious now how it works.
We'll get back on that. July 2nd, 1776, Continental Congress drafts the Declaration of Independence, resolving the American colonies, and of rights ought to be free and independent states.
America.
I like how they wrote back then, because like it's like a tongue twister sometimes.
You have to really focus.
Yeah.
Like both of us have been reading through kind of slowly the Federalist Papers, and you really have to focus on the language. And they picked. This is a little bit of a weird tangent, but there's an HBO miniseries that I started watching that's 10 years old now. It won the Emmy for like best series in 2008, but it's called John Adams, and it's Paul Giamatti plays John Adams, and so like I've been watching that. And they're like him and Ben Franklin are in the room when Jefferson first presents, at least in the show. I don't know if that happened historically or whatever, but when Jefferson presents his like one of his final drafts of the Declaration, and Jefferson is sitting there saying they start kind of bickering over the wording of it. And he says that, each word, very thoughtfully and meticulously, like, selected each word. And when you read stuff like that, you kind of get that feeling. They were very, very careful about the language that they chose.
I mean, you can even go back to, like, them going back to, like, I think, like, their teenage years where they saved all their letters and documents. And, like, that's insane. Like, what was I doing, like, when I was 14? I wasn't saving no letters that I was writing. I wasn't writing no letters.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I would. 1881, President James Garfield is assassinated. I forgot how. He lived like he didn't die immediately.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's right. I shouldn't have put assassinated. That was like when he was attacked.
Yeah, he got shot, and then it wasn't like Teddy Roosevelt. I think he had to give a speech or something like that, or some kind of event. It was at. I forgot where it was. I have to double check because I listened to a podcast and we described the assassination, which is interesting. One of the three presidents assassinated?
Lincoln, him, and Kennedy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only guy was either Cooley or Coolidge was shot, but he survived.
And Theodore Roosevelt was shot.
Yeah.
Because he had that he continued to do his speech anyway.
I might be able to name off every president, by the way. Last name only, not in order.
The people are waiting.
No, we'll do that later.
Okay.
Thurgood Marshall, the first African American Supreme Court justice, is born in 1908, which is what year? Do you know the year he was put into office?
I do not. Seat? I would assume that it was
probably
at best late 60s.
Okay.
Like after the civil rights. So it's probably late 60s, early 70s, probably.
1926, Congress established the U.S. Army Air Corps, which later turned into the Air Force, right? Yeah. After World War II. Yeah. 1937, Amelia Earhart disappears over the Pacific Ocean while trying to circumnavigate the world. That came in a little hard. She's interesting because she wasn't the best pilot. She was just like the best spoken pilot, I guess. A lot of a lot of her bigger flights that led up to her bigger flights, she was just like what do you call it? Like, she was sponsored a lot.
Oh, okay.
So she was very much in with the people that was sponsoring her, and it's interesting. I forgot
who you know. It's all about who.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch a documentary on her, and there was another lady that was in the same kind of definitely a better pilot. That's what was said in the documentary, and then also. She didn't get enough attention, I guess, too. So it's kind of interesting. 1964, LBJ signs the Civil Rights Act. If you don't know what LBJ is, you're not American.
Read a book.
You're not American. 1976, North and South Korea are reunified.
Definitely not Korea. Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Pretty sure North and South Korea are still separate.
I don't know what's going on. Okay, so my bad. That was 1976, which is the end of the Vietnam War. Right?
I think it was a few years after.
Yeah. 1980, Jimmy Carter reinstates the draft, which
all able-bodied men, 18. Like when we registered to vote, we had to register for the draft.
Oh, okay.
For military service.
Okay, I thought I was like, wait, what war did I not pay attention to? Who's on that? July 3rd, 1775, Colonel George Washington given command of the Continental Army.
He got some promotion.
Yes.
Although the colonel rank was, I don't know, kind of weird. I think that
I thought he was a general.
well, he became general, but he was not General Washington at the time.
Okay. 1903, the first cable across the Pacific Ocean is complete, connecting Honolulu, Midway, Guam, and
Manila.
Sorry, my bad.
Manila.
Jesus Christ.
So
Are
basically,
we trying to do that with Alaska?
Alaska?
Yeah, like some kind of like bridge with Alaska and like Russia.
Oh, I would never expect that to happen.
Okay.
But this is like a telegraph cable.
Oh, okay.
That so they could communicate quickly. That was not like any sort of transportation or anything.
Okay,
It was like messages, so you could send messages quickly across.
Well, cable.
Maybe I should have been more clear on that one. I apologize.
That was in 1903. 1954, food rations end in Great Britain 9 years after the end of the World War. After World War II.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was one of them. I didn't realize it was still a thing either. But
that's because of the Cold War starting and stuff.
Well, that and the fact that like Britain, France were basically bankrupt before the war started, so they were surely bankrupt after the war started as well. So.
1962, Jackie Robinson becomes the first African American to be elected into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Elected? Inducted?
Well, you have to be voted.
Oh, okay, never mind.
It is kind of a, yeah.
Good point. Well, no, but then there's probably a different day for him to be inducted. So his votes came in,
maybe, yeah.
July 4th, 1776. The amendments version of the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, is signed by John Hancock and etc., and which became Independence Day.
America.
But I don't think it was not submitted. It was submitted 2 days prior.
That was the first time that they presented it to Congress.
Yeah.
July 2nd, which we had up there earlier. I think we did we? Or did I skip it? I think I skipped it. I meant to put it in there.
Okay. 1826, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both pass away. They were. It was unfortunate between with the relationship after the Revolutionary War. They kind of became rivals in a way, politically.
Yeah.
And then, but at the end, they kind of made amends. And
John Adams' last words were Thomas Jefferson still lives or something like that. But Thomas Jefferson actually died first, but the news hadn't reached.
I think they died within hours.
Yeah. But the news hadn't reached John Adams yet, obviously, because it was 17 or 1800. But yeah, I think it's kind of like a weird little story.
Yeah, I think
funny little story.
Well, no, I have to relook at when John, because I think he went into debt for the war or something like that.
A lot of the founding fathers did. They died without their fortune.
Yeah.
That they had prior.
1861, the Battle of Harper's Ferry. What was that again? Sorry.
Civil War.
Civil War.
Yeah, it was one of the earlier bigger battles of the Civil War.
That you don't learn in school.
Yeah.
1946, the United States grants the Philippines independence. So I'm guessing they were basically what we have with Puerto Rico kind of status.
Well, they're not. They, I guess maybe.
In a way, kind of similar.
Because we got all that land at the same time.
Yeah, because of the Spanish Civil War.
Spanish America.
Yeah. Sorry, God damn, jeez. Civil War. I'm thinking of homage to Catalonia. Jesus.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I didn't know we fought Philippine people there during that war.
Yeah.
We spent
we fought the Spanish Navy out in the Pacific out there.
Yeah. 1960, the modern American flag makes its debut in Philadelphia. So with all the stars.
Yeah, with 50 stars. Yeah.
1976, Israel hostage crisis ends with the rescue of 105 people, which I think they made a movie on that, right?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, recently with Rosemary Pike or something like that, right? And the one from Brussels, she's in it, and then there's someone else.
Yeah.
Maybe John Hamm, and what's his name from Star Wars? Poe Dameron. Oscar Isaac. I think he might be in that. July 5th, 1810, P.T. Barnum is born, and then Ustat was... Who's Ustat again?
So Barnum and Bailey, like the circus.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's what it
And
was.
then if you guys have seen The Greatest Showman, the movie that came out late last year, it's Hugh Jackman's character is Beach Bum.
Okay. 1943, the largest tank battle in history, the Battle of Kursk begins, which was in Russia.
Yeah, between the Germans and the at the time Soviets.
World War II battle.
Yes.
1950, U.S. troops engage with North Koreans for the first time, who was sent by Truman and well, sent to the UN and then we were the UN.
We kind of still are the UN. Nothing's changed.
July 6th. We're going real back on this one.
Oh yeah.
1535. Thomas More is executed for refusing to swear allegiance to Henry VIII as head of the church. So I'm guessing it happened in England. Yeah. Did I say More right, or does it say like?
You did say it.
Okay.
You did good. You did good.
Make sure that's like not said like some weird English pronouncement. One say boss instead of that.
Oh,
yeah. 1779, the French Navy defeats the Royal Navy in the Battle of Grenada, which is interesting. I didn't know there was a battle in Grenada.
Really, just the continual decline that after the American Revolution, like the continual decline of the British Empire.
1835, John Marshall, the third Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, dies. The Liberty Bell cracked while ringing in his honor in Philadelphia. Oops, look over that. Yes, sir. I voted in. So good. I didn't know that's why it's cracked.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. That's a very interesting little tidbit.
So that's why the Liberty Bell is cracked. Thanks,
John Marshall.
John Marshall. I had to double check his name. First name. I knew it was Marshall. Yeah, I know. 1854, the Republican Party is created in Jackson, Michigan. I was going to say Mississippi for some stupid reason.
Well, I mean, Jackson is a big city in Mississippi.
Yeah.
I thought it was weird, like, you just think of the way the, red versus blue states are these days, and, like, you would never think of Michigan as the birthplace of Republicans.
Well,
Trump won it.
Yeah, I was
but
Trump
it's like
historically.
a recent historically blue state.
I mean, it makes sense because like Lincoln, a lot of those guys at the time, obviously it was North. A lot of those guys were Northerners.
Yeah, I guess. I didn't think about
that.
That
makes
way.
sense.
But,
Geographically,
like right before the Civil War.
Because like I mean, yeah. July 7th, 1742, the Spanish invade Georgia's colony but are defeated by the British. Which is like a pre 7 Years War, right? Or in the French and Indian War.
Yeah, it was before the French and Indian
War.
Yeah,
it was interesting. 1853, after 250 years of isolation, Japan opens its ports to trade, which is one of the other Asian countries that's done that before with China as well.
I think the difference there being that China was forced into opening its ports.
I'm saying
like Japan. I guess they were kind of forced. By the name. It was a U.S. word. America.
I don't think it was Polk. What year was that?
No, I was thinking of like
1853.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like
Buchanan. No,
I'm not trying to think of who was president then. There was like a particular person who was like there to negotiate.
Oh, okay.
And I'm blanking on his name.
1863, Robert E. Lee reports defeat at Gettysburg to President Jefferson Davis.
Jefferson Davis being the president of the Confederacy.
Yes.
And the Battle of Gettysburg was obviously a huge turning point in the Civil War. The Confederates had made it pretty far north at that point to be fighting in like Gettysburg and Harrisburg and stuff like that. So
specifically Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
If you don't know where Gettysburg is, just making sure. Making sure. 1969, U.S. troops begin to withdraw from Saigon. So that's definitely
de-escalation of the Vietnam War. Yeah.
That isn't like Call of Duty was it Call of Duty Black Ops? Don't you like play that battle? Or you play that scenario? I know it's a video.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I remember being in Saigon.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay. 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor becomes the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. She's still serving or not?
No. It's Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Elena. Illinois something. Maybe that's what I'm.
We should like look up
There's three, I think.
every Supreme Court from today going all the way back to the original one to see like their terms, see how long they lived and stuff,
Oh,
and like how long they lived after if they retired. It'd be interesting to look at that because it's a little different. Because I remember Ben talking about how it's different for Supreme Courts from now and back in the day because of lifespans.
yeah. People live longer now.
Yes. But that was history for July 1st to July 7th. Hopefully you learned a little something. There's a lot of American history in there. Some stuff in Europe, some stuff in Asia. But let us know if we miss anything. And if there's something you want us to look up more, it's down in the comments down below. But we're going to keep moving on to the Supreme Court decision.
Yeah. One of the many Supreme Court decisions that have happened over the last few weeks.
Yeah, because this is the time of the year for that. Like you said, right?
Yeah, because their session ends at the end of June. So.
But Jacob's going to be taking the reins on this one.
Yeah.
Probably on the next one to do the game. Not like the whole thing.
Yeah. So the decision that we're going to look at today is regarding the union dues, and so this was a case that came from the state of Illinois. So basically, we're going over the next few weeks, probably at least, we're maybe going to hit one of these per episode. There's been 4 or 5 kind of significant.
This is one that's definitely not been spoken about the most because the other one
right,
been,
yeah,
a little bit louder than this one.
But this is definitely one that has important consequences for a lot of people that work in the United States. And so what I did for this was go through. I read the majority of the abstract for the case itself, like why the case was being looked at by the Supreme Court. And then I also went through the court's decision that they announced. So there's always at least one justice that writes in the opinion of the court. So in this case, it was a 5-4 decision. And so the 5, I wrote it in here. Justice Samuel Alito wrote the opinion of the court, and he had about 25 to 30 pages of like basically their reasoning behind their decision. And then there's the dissent, the minority in the vote puts out what's called a dissent. And so I read through both of these, pulled out some quotes so that you guys can kind of get a gist of the reasoning behind the majority and minority on the Supreme Court, so that we can better understand kind of where both sides are coming from. So this decision, like I said, came from the state of Illinois. And so this is what it said in the abstract. Quote, under Illinois state law, public employees are forced to subsidize a union, even if they choose not to join and strongly object to the positions the union takes in collective bargaining and related activities. So basically, if you are working, this case is very specific to the public sector. So government employees basically is who this affects, which is obviously a lot of people. So this doesn't have any impact on private business. So basically, any union can require you to pay them money for services, regardless of whether or not you're a member of that union. So basically, the way this came about, it was a court case called Abood versus Board of Education. It was in 1977, and the gist of their decision was that it was legal for the unions to do this as long as the money wasn't being used for political purposes. So at that time in 1977, the court decided that the employees, in order to avoid what's called what they define as free riding, where there are people who are not part of the union but benefit from the union's activities as far as bargaining on their behalf. In order to prevent that from happening, they said that it was legal for these unions to collect money from them. So that's kind of how the foundation of this came about. But in this decision, so I'll go through real quick a couple. It was a 5-4 decision against this. So the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional and illegal for unions to force non-members to pay dues. And I think we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I think that has to do more of how kind of the roles of the unions have changed, especially over the last 30 or so years.
Yeah, the original concepts of what they're supposed to do.
Right. Yeah. So this is what Justice Alito had to say regarding the court's decision. So, quote, we conclude that this arrangement violates the free speech rights of non-members by compelling them to subsidize private speech on matters of substantial public concern. And then he goes on to talk about Abood versus Board of Education, and he says, Abood was poorly reasoned, and it has led to practical problems and abuse. It is inconsistent with other First Amendment cases and has been undermined by more recent decisions. Developments since Abood have been handed down have shed new light on the issue of agency fees, and no reliance interests on the part of public sector unions are sufficient to justify the perpetuation of the free speech violations that Abood has countenanced for the past 41 years. Abood is therefore overturned. So basically, he's saying that any of the uses of this money that the union is collecting from non-members, none of them are more important than those members' First Amendment rights. So basically, that's why they decided to overturn it. And I guess I should have looked this up, but I don't think anyone that's currently sitting on the Supreme Court was part of this decision. I don't think anyone's been sitting on the court that long.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because it's 77. That's why I asked O'Connor.
Right, yeah.
She was 81, but she isn't. So if she's not on on the bench, then there's no one at that time. So definitely be.
Right, yeah. So then Alito goes on to say later in the court's opinion that designating a union as the employee's exclusive representative substantially restricts the rights of individual employees. Among other things, this designation means that individual employees may not be represented by any agent other than the designated union, nor may individual employees negotiate directly with their employer. And so the unions are legally required to provide a breakdown of how their money is being spent. This is called a Hudson Notice. Every, I think it's year, they give a breakdown of how like all of the fees and union dues that were collected, like how that money was broken out. So you're allowed, there's two separate categories of finances for unions. Basically, I'm blanking on what the official terms are, but it's basically kind of logistical things like organizational things, paying employees to do certain work, advertising, the actual like negotiation with whatever company that you're working with, stuff like that. And then the rest of the money, which is in its own category, is like used for lobbying purposes, political purposes, stuff like that. So it says, another quote from Alito, the non-members were told that they had to pay for lobbying, social and recreational activities, advertising, membership meetings, conventions, and litigations, as well as other unspecified services that may ultimately inure the benefit of the members of the local bargaining unit. So it turned out that in this particular case, these unions in the state of Illinois were using the money for things that they shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
So I think that Alito brings up a couple of good points. Specifically for me, the fact that unions these days are restricting the ability of individual workers to bargain on their own behalf. I think that the purpose of the unions in general, there are already now, like when they were very good things when they first came about. Like it was all about like child labor, poor working conditions, like how long you could work, how many days a week you could work.
Basically, like
safety.
The start of the union made work reasonable.
Right. Yeah. And so now it's become, it's kind of, I feel unions have started to, in my opinion anyway, protect people who aren't working as hard as they should be, and then they hold back people that are excelling. So in most cases, for example, like if we're both like construction workers, neither one of us can say like you're like way more efficient at your job than I am. We're gonna get the same amount of pay, and you can't negotiate with our boss or whatever and say, hey, like I'm twice as good as everyone else here at my job, like I should get paid more.
Yeah,
you can't do that. Yeah,
because like because I work I'm a part-time worker at Irvine Unified, and that's union. I'm like 90% because my mom is she works in the transportation part, but I work in the custodial part. And yeah, we because me and Anthony basically get the same pay, and like he's been there longer, but I feel like I work harder than him.
Yeah,
in a way. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, that's an example. Like, oh, like I feel like, and then like, if I actually show that I do, then I can't change my what I think is value to me because we're technically worth the same because like it seems like it turned into like making people equally the same in a way, regardless of the output.
Right. Yeah. It does.
Yeah.
There are definitely some other benefits.
Sorry, Anthony. I do work harder than you. Oh, but yeah.
There are definitely some other benefits, and I think that more off. Well, I don't know. There are certain situations where it is better for people to kind of negotiate as a group, but at the same time, there are like the Department of Labor exists now. There are all sorts of laws that protect the things. Like if you remove unions altogether, there are all sorts of like federal and state laws on the books that would like it wouldn't go back to the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot there's a lot of just things that are obviously said, and that thing is said probably as to use to scare people to not union or to take away unions.
Yeah.
And then I mean, there's also the case where companies. I mean, I used to work at Walmart, and they always talk about like union stuff and like how like they don't want to. If you want to have a competition, that you can't have it on like the property of Walmart and stuff or something. I forgot.
Yeah, there are some other things that have changed too. Originally, if a certain workforce was going to vote on whether or not to unionize, the vote was done anonymously, and there are situations now where they're making people vote publicly, and I feel like that there might be some pressure involved.
Yeah.
So like now that you know like who's voting to be unionized and who's not, I think that it might skew the vote one way or the other just because
it's kind of a crutch.
Everyone will be aware of how their like coworkers voted, sort of thing. So that's definitely not good. But anyway, I want to move real quick before we like kind of really open up the discussion. Yeah. I want to go through the dissent real quick. So I pulled some quotes. There were 2 dissents written. The first one was pretty short. Basically, Justice Sotomayor had just like a couple sentences that she wanted to add on, and then she said that she concurred with Justice Kagan. So real quick, Sotomayor, she said, quote, having seen the troubling development in First Amendment jurisprudence over the years, both in this court and in the lower courts, I fully agree with Justice Kagan that Sorrell, in the way it has been read by this court, has allowed the courts to, and this is like, she loses me here a little bit, but she says that has allowed the courts to wield the First Amendment in an aggressive way, just as the majority does today. And then Justice Kagan had a much longer dissent, kind of explaining like their side of the story.
I thought that was only that one paragraph.
Oh no! I pulled quite a bit of stuff because I felt there were some really important points and like talking points that she made in her dissent. So she begins with the court's decisions have long made plain that government entities have substantial latitude to regulate their employers' speech, especially about terms of employment, in the interest of operating their workplaces effectively. Abood allowed governments to do just that. While protecting public employees' expression about non-workplace matters, the decision enabled the government to advance important managerial interests by ensuring the presence of an exclusive employee representative to bargain with. No recent developments have eroded its underpinnings. And it is deeply entrenched in both the law and the real world. More than 20 states have statutory schemes built on the decision. Those laws underpin thousands of ongoing contracts involving millions of employees. So the point she's making here is that in their decision, the Supreme Court overturned the Abood versus the Board of Education case, and that case is the foundation for many public sector laws, and she says 20 different states. So now there's kind of possibly this turmoil that's going to happen because the law that those laws were built on, it no longer exists. Yeah. So we'll have to see what happens probably over the next maybe year or so, see what sort of changes happen. She goes on to say, significant benefits could derive from the designation of a single union representative for all similarly situated employees in a workplace. In particular, such arrangements avoid the confusion that would result from attempting to enforce 2 or more agreements, specifying different terms and conditions of employment, prevent inter-union rivalries from creating dissension within the workforce, free the employer from the possibility of facing conflicting demands from different unions, and permit the employer and a single union to reach agreements and settlements that are not subject to attack from rival labor organizations. So basically what the minority in this case was afraid of is that if there were, say, two unions, they kind of they'll start a little bit of like a negotiation war with each other, like constantly trying to undercut each other, and like obviously they're afraid that there would be disagreements among like employees, and it would be much harder for companies to negotiate instead of it being like kind of a blanket policy like it is now. So I think I don't really know. I don't really see why there would be too much trouble, I guess, if there was more than one. Like if you look at sports, for example, like there are hundreds of agents representing people from like the same league. Maybe that's not a very good example, comparative example.
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to get into, do you want to keep on reading because the discussion? Because I think there's a bigger the discussion is like part of that part of what you were trying to get to.
Yeah. So a few more quotes here. Those fees, the court reasoned, distribute fairly the cost of collective bargaining among those who benefit. That is, all employees in the work unit. And they counteract the incentive that employees might otherwise have to become free riders. Time and again, our cases have recognized that the government has a much freer hand in dealing with its employees than with citizens at large. The government, we have stated, needs to run as effectively and efficiently as possible. That means it must be able, much as private employer is, stumbling through this. That means it must be able, much as a private employer is, to manage its workforce as it thinks fit. A public employee thus must submit to certain limitations on his or her freedom. Government workers, of course, do not wholly lose their constitutional rights when they accept their positions, but under our precedent, their rights often yield when weighed against the realities of the employment context. If it were otherwise, if every employment decision were to become a constitutional matter, the government could not function. As we later described in the Pickering inquiry, the court first asks whether the employee spoke as a citizen on a matter of public concern. If she did not, but rather spoke as an employee on a workplace matter, she has no possibility of a First Amendment claim. A public employer can curtail her speech just as a private one could. But if she did speak as a citizen on a public matter, the public employer must demonstrate an adequate justification for treating the employee differently from any other member of the general public. The government, that is, needs to show that legitimate workplace interests lay behind the speech regulation. So I was very concerned by specifically this last quote. So I guess what I didn't understand, and maybe I don't understand enough about this case, even like after what I read, but she's talking about how the government has the right to limit speech, and like the government needs this negotiation to run because the government has a mandate to run as efficiently and effectively as possible, which it definitely does not. But anyway, I feel like in this case, Justice Kagan is arguing that the government gets to curtail your speech unless you're talking about a workplace matter. So like the specific line that really concerns me is that the court first asks whether the employee who spoke as a citizen on it, like whether or not they're speaking on a matter of public concern. So like my immediate first question is, what justifies a matter, like who's defining what this public concern is? Like if you, like I feel like that's really dangerous to kind of go down that road. That's where I kind of like I don't understand the argument from the minority in this case.
Because so what I'm getting from is that what you're saying is spoken as a citizen on a matter of public concern. So I think the discussion of this is like, obviously some people get screwed when they work for a union, and they're not allowed to have like that voice. And it's kind of like a lot of issues today. Like this one, like I thought like it would be something like, okay, it just makes sense, just cut it. It's black and white, but there's a lot of gray to it. And not allowing like the smaller portion of people to be able to talk sucks. But what was saying?
Okay.
So there's a possibility of a person on the planet. So yeah, because that's the weird part is like, since it's a one person talking about their specific issue, is it one thing you're saying is it a public matter?
Where I get confused too is she's almost speaking as if the government itself is the union, or like the government itself is the head of the union, more specifically, because like I don't understand what, like, the government is the employer. The way I feel, like the way I vision this in my head is that the government is the employer. There are a bunch of employees. Those employees unionize, and there's like a head of the union that negotiates on their behalf with the federal government. But the way she's speaking here about how like the government has to run as efficiently as possible. If she's not speaking on a matter of public concern, then she has no possibility of a First Amendment claim. All of this, like, but she's speaking as if the government is the head of the.
Yeah,
that's not how it works.
I think because the government should just be the person that says no, that's not good, that's bad. Like that's what. Well, I don't know. The government should be the thing where it sets the line, and the line can't be crossed in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess.
And the thing is, like, when you have so many people that have different concerns or different kind of needs, the lines gets crossed sometimes, and like it's weird in a sense because like if you gave us like a specific issue to look at, then yeah. But like this specific court case was back in like 1977.
The Abood case, yeah, 1977.
And like I don't know. Like did you look into like what actually happened between the actual like the two parties
in the Abood case?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have I pulled this from like a kind of a summary of the Abood case. So it says the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that agency shop clauses, which are like the fees that we were talking about earlier, like making people pay whether or not they are part of the union.
But no, what specifically is like the type of work going on for this case? Is what I'm asking. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm asking. I see like
I do not remember.
Because like that, I mean, sanctions as a vehicle for non.
It would have had to have been the public sector still, like the government employee. But I do not remember what exactly their job was. Yeah,
because like I mean, we can use that as the example to carry on like the gray area of the discussion of that line. Like my personal view is, we do have those laws. We do have like the workers, the department. What was it called? The Department of Labor. Yeah. And that department is kind of already doing what unions do in a way. Not that unions are bad. There's probably some unions out there that really benefit people, but there's probably some unions out there. There might be a specific union out there. We'll have to look at it. That literally, like, it doesn't even benefit the majority. It only benefits the minority. I would bet there was probably a good amount of unions that are like that in the country. But with that said, like I said, we do have a Department of Labor. You said there was something else that we had that helps prevent this.
They're just like federal and state laws in general that are like regulating like hours, conditions, all these sorts of things.
Going off of that,
wage.
So like, I think the idea of a union now is basically getting like more benefits out of your employer. Because like my mom specifically, she gets healthcare and whatnot, and then gets healthcare for everyone else in the family, and then she's also getting. She's a salaried employee, so she doesn't get overtime. She gets like
the salaried people for the most part don't get extra money for overtime. It's kind of like there's kind of your first maybe 15 or 20 hours of overtime are kind of built into your pay, automatic pay.
But then she's allowed through the union to have like they're basically like I can take time off whenever I want.
Okay.
In a way, like if emergency, I can leave at any moment.
Yeah.
And she accumulates so many of these hours that she can be able to take. That she can use that as addition to her sick time. And like she's doing that this week. But I think she actually took the time off. So I think she uses those hours only for emergencies. But it's a weird thing like that because like that doesn't allow like if my mom negotiated and she didn't know about that, then like that's the thing when we go to like you were talking about using like a baseball with agencies or agents.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's weird because then you're still having unions in a way, but you're going through the one guy, and he's benefiting off it obviously because he's getting a portion.
Yeah, the more I've thought about that, the more I think that the sports analogy was not a good one to use because like there are individual agents like
I don't think it's a bad
negotiating with teams, but like there is a players association that like all the players are negotiating against with the league. Like there's one person negotiating on behalf of all MLB players.
But that's like for like a minimum payment of like a certain player or like a minimum.
Yeah, it is. It has to do with
certain like restrictions on like how much time is spent on the field with your, and then like certain things with like in your contract that you're allowed to negotiate with.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that's not a bad analogy because it's just weird to see like if we took unions away and we had agents like that, like but then you still have unions in a way. But the only thing is like you would continuously have to. Only when you renew, basically, you would have to pay it. Like, I'm not sure how sports agents work. I mean, obviously, they get paid every year through the player salary because they negotiate that because they get a portion of that.
Right, yeah.
But for if they, let's say they do a one-time deal, but it lasts for 5 years, you know, you only pay the agent that 1 year for whatever benefits he helps you get. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense in a way because he only gets paid that one time and he's not continuously to mooch off. Mm-hmm. And he's going to have to be looking for work. And then obviously the better he does, the more people I want to go around, more other groups of labor or groups of people that need some kind of representation. Because like we're not gonna read the I'm saying like this, but regular people they're not gonna know, and like that's why we have those labor Department of Labor to make sure that it protects those kind of people. Because it's like not that you don't want to invest in that time, you should invest in that time, but not a lot of people look at that and like. So like, how many hours should I work this week, or how much should I be getting paid? And then that goes into like the minimum wage stuff too. If you want to even get people, like there's like.
So the research, some of the research that I did for this, there are basically two fields of thought. So obviously there are people that think. Well, I mean, there's some people in the middle too, I'm sure, but like I'd say the one side is that unions aren't necessary anymore. And that they are a greater harm than they are good because it prevents like the example is always used with like teachers. So like the teachers union prevents bad teachers from being fired and prohibits good teachers from earning more money and like kind of rising to the top because like they're all being paid, and also promotions are based on seniority and not on the merits of the employees themselves. So like you get promoted based on like how many years you've been a teacher, and like your salary is based on how many years you've been a teacher, not how good of a teacher you actually are.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking now, because like since this is going through, so now the thing with the teachers unions, like how that's going to work out. It's coming through. That's going to be interesting because there's a strike I think in like Oklahoma, right? Not too long ago. There's a couple of strikes in like Wisconsin, and how that's going to work out now, because I don't think they actually have unions there.
Wisconsin, I think they do not.
Okay, yeah. There's certain states that do.
So I remember that
here in California, they do.
I forget who was elected governor. Walker, his last name.
Yeah,
he was elected governor there in Wisconsin. I think like that was one of the first things he did was like they got rid of unions.
Yeah, because that's going to be an interesting thing because I think yes, for teachers they should be able to negotiate on how good they teach. And I think it's weird too to like look at that though, because like what I'm thinking is like when you look at a baseball player and his performance, and then that's how you evaluate how much you're going to pay.
Right.
Like it's weird to see that though, but for like the X amount of people now. But I think it's possible to do that. It's just like, are we gonna have another department where they evaluate people? Then is that gonna get corrupt then? You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, it's weird. It's honestly, this is much more of a gray area for me than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
Because so like I was saying, like on the one side, it's people who think that it's holding people back and limiting like preventing companies from getting rid of people that are performing poorly. And on the other side, so like the whole thing kind of balances on your opinion of the free market and your opinion of, I guess, kind of capitalism in a way, on like what you think is going to happen when the employers can do whatever they want. So like on the other side, the argument was that if you get rid of unions, all of the companies are going to treat their employees very poorly. Like the wages are going to drop, is what like the argument was on the other side. It's like basically like how optimistic are you in the like good nature of big businesses? Basically.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people that are going to say big businesses is like it's the devil. You know, it's like corporations. So
yeah.
I hate them. But I think like nowadays, you see more of what behavior goes on in that realm. In the sense of like what people just talk about, people coming out and stuff and seeing like how they're treated. Just because with like a cell phone like this right here, you can record the conversation and saying and like as I'm saying like you can get them like but I think it should be less of a problem by now. You would think it is, because like we should have been able to look at this issue, solve it, and then move on, and not have to go back to it. But we're going back to it from 1977, and it's 2018.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things. I think personally, I tend to lean on the side of the like unions are a bigger harm than they are a good these days. Like we've talked about, there are plenty of laws on the books that are protecting the things that needed protection when unions first came around. Like all of those, like none of those things, those are set in stone now. None of those things are going to happen. And I think one of the examples that were used in one of the articles that I read was that federal public sector unions contributed $300 million to Obama's campaign against John McCain in 2012.
Okay.
So like when I see this decision, I think like there were people that were not part of these unions, like probably millions of employees that were not part of these unions that these unions that were taking money from those people. Yeah. Like say there was like 500,000 Republicans working in the public sector, like their money went to keeping John McCain out of the White House.
Yeah.
Like that's not something that should be allowed to happen. Like, and that's the sort of like the money that is being collected, and like it said on here, if I can find the quote. So it said the non-members were being told that they had to pay for lobbying, social and recreational activities, advertising, membership meetings and conventions, litigation, and unspecified services. And so the nature, Ben Shapiro was talking about this when this decision first came out. He was saying that there's basically a lot of corruption in unions these days, that like the union money is funneled to politicians, and then politicians change laws or like do whatever they do, and like that makes the unions more wealthy, and then that money gets funneled back. Like it's like a cycle now between unions and politicians, where it's like I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back.
Well, I mean, for the left, that's basically pro-union. I mean, you can just make the simple argument. Okay, switch the scenario then. It's the minority of Democrats that are giving money to this union that's pro-Republican. So you're basically doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. So just like reverse it. Yeah. Like I mean, not that it defeats the argument, but it like kind of neutralizes that kind of thing. Like I'm saying, like it's too bad or something like that. Like, oh, they should be, whatever they can say that would like not make any sense, basically.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say I want to see someone's argument in the sense of like, okay, since we get rid of unions, right? All right, what are we doing then to not replace it, but is a bridge to make that seem like it's not going to be crazy and like not people aren't going to be abused and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And like I think that's what's going on with the media in the sense like we're not seeing like that bridge.
Right.
Or that bridge being able to talk to make more sense to show people that this idea seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah. For me, I think what's going to prevent just complete chaos from happening is the market itself. I'll liken it to the oh man, my mind totally went blank. So anyway, like the regulating the example I was going to use, I completely forgot. But regulating the so if I it was what's the internet net neutrality.
Yeah.
That's the example I was going to use. So what people are afraid of with net neutrality is that like phone's going way off. With net neutrality, people are afraid of internet companies raising prices on, like, say they make streaming from Netflix more expensive and stuff like that. So like what I feel is going to happen is that like it's going to introduce an extra layer of competitiveness inside, like within internet service providers. So like if Comcast tells me that I have to pay an extra $20 a month for Netflix and YouTube, and then Spectrum tells me that they'll like, and they have similar like base service or whatever, and Spectrum tells me they'll do it for 10, then like I'm gonna go, like the marketplace will, if someone becomes like egregious with their like as soon as net neutrality is done and like one company makes all these huge changes, like they're gonna lose all their customer base. I feel like sorry, I just want to finish my point real quick. I feel like the same thing would happen with business if they so now like unions can't collect money, and or say unions dissolve tomorrow, and like the first company that started like abusing their employees, like the best of those employees are going to leave and go to a rival company.
Yeah.
And so the benefits and the wages and the time off and the health care that's being provided by the companies and all that, like it becomes part of the competition for employment between these businesses. Like if they want the best employees, they have to have the best compensation and the best, like, whatever your level of talent and ability merits.
Yeah, I think the only argument against the net neutrality one is that all the companies are gonna communicate and like maybe
cooperate with each other.
Yeah, and like make a set fee. But I think when you look at that too, like we can even use the video game industry with like the Xbox and the PlayStation, and how they price everything, and like how one will wait for the other one and then they'll lower the price based off of that.
Yeah.
So like I mean I think that's like a more reasonable example, and I think that would be what would probably happen, because I mean you see that right straight in the face.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean we'll see. I want to see what happens like throughout the country and how this is all going to work out. There's definitely people you hear that are teachers or part of like certain unions like that don't have like their voices heard and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're gonna have to move on anyway.
Yeah, we do that. Sorry, I rambled on for a while.
That's fine.